8 people saw a starving child in the snow, and every single one looked away.
The snow came sideways that night outside Black Creek, Colorado. Not the soft kind that settled on windowsills and made children press their faces to cold glass. This was the kind that buried roads and swallowed headlights and made the world outside disappear 1 inch at a time until all that remained was white noise and the feeling that everything beyond arm's reach had simply stopped existing. Highway 191 had been a road 2 hours ago. Now it was a suggestion. The only proof that civilization existed anywhere in that darkness was a neon sign half a mile off the main drag, bleeding red light into the storm, like an open cut that refused to close. The sign read Mackey's Diner. Below it in smaller letters that the weather had been working on for years, the word welcome had faded to something closer to a question mark than an invitation. Inside, the air was thick, bacon grease and wet wool, and the low, particular silence of people who did not want to speak to each other. 8 people occupied the diner at 9:47 on a Tuesday night in January. 3 truckers spread across separate booths like men staking out territory. A couple in their 50s who had stopped talking to each other somewhere around the Nevada border and had not started again. A highway patrol officer nursing decaf and studying the middle distance. A woman behind the counter named Darla, whose name tag had lost its first letter, so it just said Arla, which nobody had mentioned in 3 years. The jukebox in the corner had been broken since a previous administration. Nobody had unplugged it. It sat there silent and purposeless, which was more honest than most things in that room. The last booth, the one in the very back, beneath a fluorescent tube that had given up flickering and settled into permanent darkness, held a man who had not touched his coffee in 22 minutes. His name was Boone Calloway. He was 53 years old and carried it the way certain men carry age, not in the face externally, but in the specific density of their stillness. He was big in the way that accumulates in men who have spent their lives doing physical things in unforgiving places. His hands rested flat on the table. They were the hands of someone who had used them for more than most people would want to know about. A leather vest hung off his shoulders, cracked and dark, with a patch on the back that read, "Iron Saints," above a skeletal fist gripping a broken sword. Below the patch, in letters stitched with silver thread that had gone gray with years, the words, "Black Creek Chapter." His face was a record of damage. A scar ran from his left temple down through his cheekbone and disappeared into the line of his jaw. A second one crossed the bridge of his nose at an angle. A third disappeared beneath his collar. His eyes were gray, and they were doing what gray eyes do when they stop trying to show anything. They were watching. I had been watching since the snow started getting serious. Watching the door. Watching the parking lot through the window where his Harley was already half buried. Watching the road beyond that had stopped being a road. He was not waiting for anything. He had stopped waiting for things a long time ago. He was simply present in the way that men who have done time learn to be present, filling a space without requiring it to mean anything. That was when the door opened. Not dramatically. Not with a gust that rattled dishes and turned heads. It opened the way very small things open large doors slowly with effort, the wood dragging against the frame as something on the other side pushed against the weight of it. And through the gap came a sound. Tap, scrape, tap, scrape. Every head in the diner lifted, not quickly, not with alarm, the way heads lift when something registers at the edge of awareness and the brain has not yet decided what category to put it in. She was 6 years old. 6 years old, and approximately the size of what 6 years produces when there has not been enough food for long enough that the body starts negotiating with itself about which systems to maintain. Her coat was thin, the kind that ends up in donation bins outside gas stations, the kind nobody donates unless they have something better. Her jeans were soaked to the knee on the right side. On the left side, the jeans stopped at mid-thigh, and the pant leg had been folded up and pinned with a safety pin that had come halfway undone. Below the fold, where a left leg should have continued, there was a stump, scarred and pale and exposed at the bottom where the pin had given way. The skin reddened from the cold in a way that suggested it had been reddened for a while. She was moving on a pair of aluminum crutches that were too tall for her by at least 4 inches, the kind designed for an adult, the rubber on the bottoms worn down to bare metal. Each step was a negotiation, her arms shaking, her 1 foot finding purchase on the wet floor, the crutches sliding slightly before catching. Tap, scrape. She stood just inside the door, and the snow melted off her in sheets, pooling around the crutch tips, and she looked at the room with eyes that were enormous and dark, and had learned something that eyes that age are not supposed to have learned. She swept the room the way you sweep a room when every room you have ever walked into has contained a variable you needed to identify before it identified you. She went to the first booth. A heavy man with a plaid shirt and a plate of meatloaf, three-quarters gone. She stood beside his table and opened her mouth. He shook his head before she finished drawing the breath. Did not look up from his plate. Just shook his head the way you wave off something that is not worth the motion of a full gesture. She went to the next booth. A younger man, maybe 30, with a phone in his hand and the specific inward focus of someone for whom the world outside the screen is increasingly optional. She touched the edge of his sleeve. He pulled his arm back like she had burned him. "Where are your parents?" he said to his phone. "Go find your parents." She went to the next table. A woman in her mid-40s with lipstick that had migrated slightly and a cup of decaf she was not drinking. The girl's voice came out barely above the wind noise pressing at the windows. "Please, ma'am, I am really hungry." The woman looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then she looked toward the counter. "Darla," she said, "there is a child in here. Somebody should call someone." Darla did not look up. "Phone lines are down. Storm knocked everything out an hour ago." The woman turned back to the girl with the expression of someone who has discharged an obligation by naming it. "I am sorry, honey. I cannot help you." She said it the way people say things when the sentence was already true before they open their mouth. The girl stood there a moment, swaying slightly on the crutches, arms trembling from the sustained effort of carrying herself this far. Then she turned and kept moving. Booth to booth, table to table, the same answer in different textures of cowardice. A turned shoulder, a studied interest in the salt shaker, a hand raised in something that was almost a stop sign. The highway patrol officer looked at her for a long moment and then gave his coffee the attention it had not previously warranted. 8 people in that diner. 8 people watched a 6-year-old girl on broken crutches move through their world in the cold and the wet and the hunger, and every single one of them found a reason. Every single one. Boone Calloway had not moved since she came through the door. He had not shifted in his seat or made any of the small physical signals that people make when they are preparing to either help or refuse. He had simply watched. With those flat gray eyes, he had tracked her from booth to booth, and something was happening behind those eyes that his face was not reporting. Now she was at his table. She stopped at the edge of it. Up close, she was worse than the distance had suggested. Her cheeks had the specific hollowness that comes from the body drawing on its own reserves. The tendons in her neck were visible, her lips were cracked, and the lower one had a split that had been bleeding recently. On her left wrist, just below the edge of her coat sleeve, there was a bruise. The specific yellow-brown of a bruise that had been remade several times in the same location, the kind that comes from something gripping and not letting go. Boone looked at the bruise. He looked at her face. He looked at the room. Then he reached out with his boot and pushed the chair across from him, away from the table. "Sit down," he said. 2 words. No warmth in them and no performance of welcome. Just a door opening in a wall that had been sealed shut for a long time. She looked at him for a moment with those enormous eyes, running a calculation that no child should have to run. Then she got herself onto the chair. It took effort because the crutches were awkward and her arms were exhausted, but she got there. She sat. She leaned the crutches against the edge of the booth and put her hands in her lap. And she waited for the punishment that always came after she dared to ask for something. Boone could see it in every line of her posture. The shoulders pulled in, the chin down, the hands folded tight. The whole body contracted into the minimum possible footprint. She had learned that asking for things cost something. She was waiting to find out what it was going to cost here. He raised one finger toward Darla without turning his head. Darla looked at him. She started to say something, possibly about the kitchen closing, possibly about the hour. Then she looked at his face and decided that making the food was the better option. 4 minutes later, a plate hit the table. Grilled cheese on white bread, edges pressed flat by the grill. A mug of hot chocolate, steam rising, simple things made for someone who was very hungry and did not need complexity. The girl's hands shook when she reached for the mug. From the depth of the need, the kind of shaking that lives in the muscles, when the body has been running a deficit long enough that receiving something feels almost like a malfunction. She ate the way animals eat when they have learned that things get taken, fast and low to the plate with one eye on the exits, barely chewing, glancing up between bites with the vigilance of something that has had food disappear before. Boone watched without speaking. He had seen men eat like that in a lot of places, in places where that specific quality of hunger had been deliberate applied as a tool. But he had never seen a child eat like that, and something in his chest was doing something he was not going to name. He waited until the shaking in her hands settled from violent to merely persistent. "What is your name?" he said. "Ren," she said to the plate. "Ren what?" A pause. "Cole." "Where did you come from tonight, Ren Cole?" Her eyes moved to the window, to the door, back to the table. She was doing the same calculation again, measuring the distance between where she was and where danger might arrive from. "Home," she said finally. And the way she said that word, it came out like the name of a place she was describing from the outside, like somewhere she had already left in every way except geography. "Those bruises on your arm," Boone said. "Who did that?" Her whole body went rigid. Her fingers found the edge of the table and curled around it. For a moment, he thought she was going to take the crutches and disappear back into the blizzard the way she had arrived. But she looked up at him instead, really looked at him for the first time, not a glance, a look that went past the scars and the ink and the worn leather and searched for the thing underneath the thing that either is or is not there, the thing that tells you whether the person across from you is a door or a wall. Whatever she found, she decided to keep talking. "My stepdad," she said. "Raymond." He did not react. The muscle in his jaw tightened once, that was all. "He locks me in a room," Wren continued. Her voice was flat in the way voices go when they have been describing the same facts long enough that the emotion has worn off them like paint off a railing. "There is no window. He puts a lock on the outside. Sometimes he does not bring food for a long time. A really long time." She swallowed. "Your leg," Boone said quietly. "How did you lose it?" Her chin went still. She squeezed her eyes shut, and when she opened them, there were no tears. Just the dry, emptied look of someone who finished crying about a particular thing long ago and moved into something quieter. "He said it was an accident with the truck. He said I ran behind it and he did not see me." Her voice dropped lower. "But he saw me. He was looking in the mirror when it happened. I saw his eyes looking at me, and he did not stop." Boone sat with those words. In the wreckage of everything he had built into himself over 53 years, the prison, the years after the slow reconstruction, something cracked, not loudly, the way old concrete cracks when water gets into the fault lines and the temperature drops. A fracture that had been forming for a long time along a fault he had never acknowledged. He pulled a phone from his vest pocket, a battered flip phone with a cracked screen held together with black electrical tape. He typed a message with his thumb and sent it. 5 words: broken wagon, child in danger, bring everyone. Wren watched him. "Who did you text?" she said. "Family," he said. He closed the phone and pushed the hot chocolate slightly closer to her. She looked at it, then at him. Then she picked it up with both hands and held it, just held it, the warmth traveling up her arms and into the parts of her that had been cold for longer than one night. 11 minutes later, Wren heard it, a low rolling sound that she felt in her sternum before she heard it with her ears. And unlike thunder, this sound grew. It multiplied. Each new layer added to the last with the precision of something organized. Engines, dozens of them, coming through the white dark. Headlights swept the parking lot, old iron cutting through the snow, warm and yellow. Motorcycles materialized from the storm one by one, their riders hunched against the wind, their chrome glazed with ice. They parked in a line with military precision, killing their engines in sequence, until the sudden silence was louder than the noise had been. The door opened. Cold air flooded in, carrying the smell of exhaust and wet leather, and something harder to name, the smell of men who had been through things that did not have words. They came in one at a time. Big men, scarred men, men who moved with the economy of people who had learned not to waste motion because in the places they had been wasted motion had costs. Black leather vests over flannel and denim, each one bearing the same patch Boone wore. Iron Saints, Black Creek chapter. They filled the empty spaces in the diner with a quiet that was louder than noise. They positioned themselves between the door and the back booth, along the wall, near the exits. The last man through the door was taller than the rest and moved with a slowness that had nothing to do with hesitation. He was 61 years old with a gray beard cropped close to a jaw that looked installed rather than grown. His left hand was missing its last two fingers. A patch on his chest read President, and below it, stitched in red that had gone dark with years, a single name, Reaper. Reaper Briggs walked to Boone's booth and looked at Wren. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, as though the looking itself was the gathering of something he intended to use. Then he pulled a chair from the next table, turned it backward, and sat down. "Hey, little one," he said. His voice was gravel in a tin bucket, but it was quiet gravel. "Nobody is going to hurt you in here. You understand that?" Wren looked at Boone. Boone nodded once. She looked back at Reaper. "I is going to come looking for me," she said. "Raymond. He always does." Reaper glanced at the line of Iron Saints standing between the door and the booth. 12 men, every one of them watching the spaces around her rather than looking at her directly. "Let him come," Reaper said. Wren reached for what remained of her hot chocolate. Her hands were still. For the first time since she had come through the door, the hands were still. That was when Raymond Pruitt walked in. He came through the door with his face already composed. That was the thing Boone noted first. The worry was fully assembled when he arrived, like a suit put on in the parking lot. The furrowed brow, the wide scanning eyes, the particular set of the mouth that reads as a father at the end of his endurance. How was good? Boone had to give him that. The voice cracked in the right places. The eyes watered on cue. His hands trembled with what any reasonable stranger would interpret as genuine parental terror. "Oh, thank God," Raymond said, entering the room. "Has anyone seen my daughter? She is 6 years old. She has a disability. She wandered off in the storm, and I have been looking everywhere." And then his eyes found Wren. The relief on his face was calibrated. It appeared exactly when it should have appeared and looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. Wren stopped breathing. Her chest, which had been moving with the slow, shallow rhythm of someone finally resting, simply stopped. Her hands locked around the mug. The ceramic made a faint sound, a low creak, like something being compressed past its limit. Her eyes went wide and blank, not the wide eyes of a child seeing a parent, the wide eyes of something cornered that has learned that stillness is the only defense available when the threat is too close and the exits are too far. "Every Iron Saint in that room saw it." "Ember, sweetheart," Raymond said, stepping forward. "Come here." Boone stood up. He came out of the booth and stood between Raymond and the child with the unhurried certainty of someone who has decided that a particular thing is not going to happen and is now representing that decision with his body. He did not raise his hands. He did not raise his voice. He simply filled the space that Raymond was trying to move through. Raymond stopped. His eyes moved from Boone to the leather vest to Reaper to the door. The performance flickered, just long enough for the calculation behind it to show through. "I am her father," Raymond said. His voice had hardened. "I have every legal right to take my daughter home." "Stepfather," Wren said from behind Boone. One word, barely a whisper. It landed in the room with the weight of a verdict. Reaper stood up slowly. "Storm is getting worse," he said. "Roads are closing. Why do not you head on home and we will make sure she gets somewhere safe?" "She is safe with me. I am her father and I am telling you to step aside." Reaper's voice did not change volume, but something in it dropped to a frequency that vibrated through the floorboards. "I am going to say this one time. Walk out that door. Get into your vehicle. Drive home. That is the best thing that happens to you tonight. Everything else is worse." Raymond's jaw tightened. His eyes swept the room one more time. The math was clear. 12 men, 12 leather vests, the specific quality of attention that certain men bring to a room when they have decided something. He pointed at Boone. "She lies," Raymond said. "She has been this way since her mother died. She invents things." "Door," Boone said. 5 seconds of silence, thick enough to press against your ears. Then Raymond turned and shoved through the door and walked into the blizzard. Nobody relaxed. Boone turned back to Wren. She was still frozen in the booth, knuckles white around the mug, eyes fixed on the space where Raymond had been. "He is gone," Boone said. She shook her head. Not a disagreement, a correction. "He is not gone," she said. "He never goes. He just goes somewhere to get angrier." Outside, an engine started. Headlights swept the windows. Then nothing but the storm. Reaper walked to the window and watched the taillights disappear. After a long moment, he turned back. "Two on the door, two on the back exit. Nobody sleeps. And someone find me an address." The Iron Saints moved, not with theater, with the fluid efficiency of men who had learned to trust each other, not because trust was a value they held abstractly, but because the alternative had costs they could still count. Boone slid back into the booth across from Wren. The hot chocolate was cold now, a skin forming on the surface. He looked at her. The girl who had crossed 3 miles of blizzard on broken crutches because whatever was behind her was worse than what was in front of her. The girl who had moved through a room full of people with every capacity to help and had kept moving anyway, booth to booth, because stopping was not an option she allowed herself. "Wren," he said, "I need you to tell me everything." She looked at him for a long time with those enormous eyes. Then she said the thing that changed the shape of the entire room. "If I tell you," she said, "he will kill me like he killed my mom." The words arrived like something dropped from a height. Boone went completely still. Reaper, who had been moving back toward the booth, stopped mid-stride. Three Iron Saints near the counter turned their heads at the same moment. Boone kept his voice level. "Like a road. Your mom." "What do you mean, Wren?" She gripped the edge of the table. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet it was nearly swallowed by the wind outside. "She got sick. Raymond said it was cancer. But I watched him every night. He made her tea, a different cup than ours. He brought it to her himself, and he stood there while she drank it. She got sicker and sicker. The doctor said it was cancer, and she died." Wren's breath hitched once, then steadied. "But it was not cancer. I know it was not cancer, because I watched him. And he has a new tea now, a different cup, one he brings to me himself and stands there while I drink." She paused, and the pause was the worst part. "He is doing the same thing to me." Boone stood up, his chair scraped back. He was at the door pulling on his gloves before the sound of it had finished crossing the room, and he stepped out into the blizzard, because if he stayed inside with what he now knew, and the man who had caused it somewhere in the dark, he was going to do something that would put him back in prison, and the girl needed him outside of prison. He stood in the snow for 3 minutes. Long enough for the cold to become something other than a sensation and more like a fact his body had to accommodate. Then he went back inside. His phone was buzzing. A message from Axel. Got the address. "You are not going to believe this house." He looked at Reaper. Reaper had read it in his face when he walked back through the door. "Stay with her," Boone said. He zipped his vest and walked out into the storm. The house on Granger Court was 2 miles off the highway on a street that had been designed to communicate normalcy with the precision of a professional set dresser. White siding, two-car garage. Flower boxes beneath the front windows, where dead stems had been holding their positions for months. The kind of street where nothing bad was supposed to happen because the neighborhood itself was a signal. Boone, Axel, and Sawyer came in through the back. The door was unlocked. Raymond had left in a hurry. The kitchen announced itself immediately. Not through disorder, but through its opposite. Every surface scrubbed, every object aligned, the air thick with bleach over something underneath that the bleach was working to cover. The kind of clean that is not about cleanliness, but about control, about the message that control sends. The refrigerator had a padlock on it, not a child safety latch, a padlock. Hardware store issue, the kind for storage units. Boo stood in front of it and said nothing. He moved on. The living room was a theater production. Family photographs on the mantel arranged like marketing material. Raymond smiling in each one with the ease of a man who has made smiling a professional skill. A woman beside him in the earlier ones, dark-haired and thin, her smile the smile of someone performing a normal life with whatever she had remaining. And in the photographs, including a child, a girl with crutches and a bow in her hair, smiling with eyes working very hard to match the expression below them. Boone looked at those photographs for a moment, then moved. Axel was already in the hallway, standing in front of a door at the far end, same white as every other door. Except this one had a deadbolt on the outside. He said Boone's name. Just the name. The way you say a name when you need the other person to understand something before the seeing finishes the job. Boone slid the bolt, pushed the door open. 5 feet by 7 feet. No window, no light fixture, a bare socket in the ceiling where a bulb had been removed. Walls painted black, not dark gray. Black. The specific black that eliminates the perception of boundaries, that tells you the walls are anywhere and everywhere, and nowhere all at once. Bare concrete floor. In the corner, a piece of fabric that had once been a towel, now so thin and stained, it had become something without a category. Nothing else. No blanket, no pillow, no toy, no drawing, no evidence that a child had existed in this space as anything other than something being stored. Except in the far corner, scratched into the black paint, was something that might have been a coin or a key or a fingernail applied with enough desperation to substitute for tools. Please let me out. Boone stood in the doorway and looked at those words, and the thing happening in his chest was not anger. He had lived with anger long enough to recognize it the way you recognize weather. This was the thing anger sits on top of, the bedrock of it, the thing that forms in very early places and does not move. I had been in a room like this once. Different state, different house, same lock on the outside, same darkness, same silence that accumulates when a child stops screaming because screaming has exhausted its utility. He had been 9 years old. He had been there for 3 years before he was large enough to break the lock himself. Get pictures, he said to Axel. His voice came out flat and empty, the voice of a man who has packed everything he is feeling into a container and sealed it because losing control now would cost the girl every room, the lock, the fridge, the walls, all of it. Axel's phone flash lit the black room in bursts. White, dark, each burst showing another detail. Scratch marks on the inside of the door. A rust-colored stain near the far wall. A crack where small fingers had tried to find a seam between the black and whatever existed outside it. In the master bedroom, a file drawer in the closet locked, which Sawyer opened in 8 seconds. Inside, 3 insurance policies, all naming Ren Cole as the insured, all with Raymond Pruitt as sole beneficiary, all signed on the same date. Boone looked at that date, then at the medical paperwork beneath the policies. Lisa Cole, oncology reports, the diagnosis date, 2 weeks after the insurance policies were signed. Raymond had insured a 6-year-old girl for $300,000 2 weeks before arranging for her mother to receive a terminal diagnosis. Beneath the medical records, a handwritten note in a woman's handwriting, a list of chemical names, and at the bottom, underlined twice in pen that had pressed through the paper with the force of urgency. He knows I found this. Move the notebook tonight. Boone photographed everything and put it back exactly as he found it. He walked out through the back into the snow, into the dark. Sawyer and Axel followed. None of them spoke on the way to the bikes. He called Reaper from the highway. It is worse than we thought, he said. 3 insurance policies on the girl. The mother was being poisoned before she was ever diagnosed. And I found a note in the mother's handwriting. She had a list of chemical names. She had discovered something and moved it before he found out she knew. Whatever she moved, it is still out there somewhere. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Reaper said the thing that changed the shape of everything. Boone, before you get back, one of Axel's contacts ran the shell company in those insurance documents. Boone waited. The name that came up in the payment records. The man running recruitment for this operation, finding the men, connecting them to whoever is handling the legal structure. Boone, it is Slade Vance. The motorcycle almost went sideways on the ice. Slade Vance, former vice president of the Iron Saints Black Creek chapter. A man who had ridden with the club for 11 years, who had stood at their backs in places where having your back covered was the difference between going home and not going home. A man who had sat at their table and worn their patch and spoken the words that the patch was supposed to mean. A man who Reaper had allowed to walk away 3 years ago for reasons described as health concerns that had never been examined too closely, because examining them would have forced a confrontation that might split the club in half. Boone rode through the storm, and the storm did not care. In the diner behind him, in a booth in the back, a 6-year-old girl sat with her hands around a cold mug and waited for the man who had pulled out a chair to come back. She did not know about the photographs or the insurance documents or the note in her mother's handwriting. She did not know about Slade Vance. She knew one thing. Her mother had hidden something, and she was the only person left alive who knew where it was. The Mountain Rest Motel sat 12 miles south of Black Creek on a stretch of highway that had been slowly losing the argument with the surrounding landscape for decades. Single-story concrete block, 8 rooms, a parking lot that was more pothole than asphalt. Room 7 was at the far end, a thin line of light beneath the door. Boone knocked 3 times, a pause, then twice more. The chain rattled. 4 inches of gap. A woman looked through. Late 30s, dark hair pulled back with the efficiency of someone who had stopped caring about appearance several consecutive 18-hour workdays ago. Eyes that were alert in the way eyes get when sleep deprivation has become a baseline condition. She looked at Boone, at Reaper behind him, at their vests and their faces. "You are the bikers," she said. "You are the journalist," Reaper said. She let them in. Her name was Carla Webb. She had been in room 7 for 11 days. The room showed it, every surface covered with documents, but covered purposefully, folders arranged in sequences, court records stacked with their tabs, visible photographs pinned to the wall above the headboard with push pins and connected by red string in a pattern that looked from a distance like the work of someone who had lost their mind, but up close revealed itself as something else entirely. A map, not geographic, relational. Names and dates and institutions and financial transactions rendered as a web with 3 names circled in black marker at the center. Kessler, Holt, Strell, branching from those 3 names like tributaries from a contaminated river. 7 more names with dates beside them. Women's names, each date the date of a death. Boone stood in the center of the room and looked at the wall. "Your contact said you had something you would not say over the phone," he said. Carla walked to the desk and picked up a folder thicker than the others sealed with tape she cut with her thumbnail. She removed a single photograph, black and white, grainy, shot from distance through what appeared to be a window. 3 men at a table in a private dining room, white tablecloth, wine glasses, the kind of room that exists to ensure conversations held within it remain unrecorded. She held it out to Boone. He took it and looked at it, and the floor moved beneath him. The first man he identified from Carla's wall, Martin Kessler, a state attorney, insurance litigation, clean public record, the kind of professional photograph that projected dependability. The second man was heavier, older, a napkin tucked into his collar, with the comfort of a man who had dined in private rooms often enough that the ritual had lost its formality. Judge Warren Strell, family court, 4 counties. The third man Boone knew without any photograph or file to cross-reference him against. He knew him from 11 years of shared roads and shared fires in the specific intimacy of men who have stood back to back enough times to memorize each other's breathing. Slade Vance. He had put on weight. His beard was trimmed. He wore a jacket that cost more than most Iron Saints spent on clothing in a year. He looked like a man who had found a more profitable vocation and had organized his entire exterior around communicating that fact. He looked comfortable. Boone handed the photograph to Reaper without speaking. He watched Reaper's face as the old man looked at it, watched the recognition arrive, watched what came after, moving through surprise and confusion and landing somewhere that was neither and was worse than both. "When was this taken?" Reaper said. His voice had the control of a man spending something to maintain it. "8 months ago, a restaurant in Denver, private dining room. I had a source who worked there as a server. She photographed it the same night." Carla paused. "Your former VP has been meeting with Kessler and Strell regularly. 9 meetings in 14 months. Always the same room, always cash. What is his role?" Boone said. Carla looked at him with the directness of a woman who had been looking at something ugly for 8 months and had run out of ways to soften it. "I is the recruiter. Kessler builds the legal structure. Strell controls the family court outcomes. Holt manages the child welfare documentation. But someone has to find the men, the Raymonds, men with debts and records and the specific flexibility that makes them useful. Slade identifies them, assesses them, connects them with Kessler, who sets up the insurance architecture. He takes a percentage of every payout." The room was quiet in a way that was different from before she had spoken. 7 confirmed, Carla continued. "My source thinks there are more in counties she has not been able to access yet." Boone thought about Lisa Cole. A woman writing in a green notebook was shaking hands every night after her husband went to sleep, documenting what was being done to her because documentation was the only weapon available. 7 women who had not had even that. He looked at Reaper. The Rodriguez boy, Boone said. Marco, 9 years old. Pueblo, we had testimony, we had photographs, we had a teacher willing to go on record. The case went to family court and collapsed in 72 hours. The judge ruled the evidence improperly obtained. The foster father got the boy back. Reaper said nothing. 6 weeks later, the boy was dead. Blunt force trauma. The official report said he fell down the stairs. Boone held Reaper's gaze. The judge in that case, Carla said quietly, was Strell. The heater in the corner rattled. Outside, a truck passed on the highway. The sound came and went. Reaper set the photograph on the desk. He aligned it with the edge of the surface with a precision that was not about neatness. It was about having something to do with his hands, while everything else was too large to touch. When Slade left the club, Boone said, "You said it was health reasons, but there were questions, money that did not add up, contacts nobody could account for." "There were questions," Reaper said. "Did you know?" Reaper was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the quality of the quiet changed. "I suspected," he said finally. "I did not know. And I told myself the difference mattered." Boone looked at the man he had followed for 20 years. The man who had stood at the center of the only thing that had ever organized the years after prison into something with a shape. He looked at him and felt the crack that had started forming in the diner extend another inch. Marco Rodriguez was 9 years old, Boone said, and Reaper did not argue, because there was nothing to argue with. "I should have dealt with it when I had the chance," Reaper said. The words came out stripped to their bones. No defense, no qualification, just the flat statement of a man putting down something he had been carrying in the only way that thing can be put down, by naming it in front of someone who will not look away. The room held it. Then Carla said, "There is something else." She went to the wall and touched a photograph near the upper right corner. A school picture. A girl about Ren's age with her hair in pigtails, and a blue backdrop, and the smile of a child who has been told to smile and has done so without knowing what the photograph would later become. Her name was Sophie Aldridge, Carla said. She was 7 years old. She died of malnutrition in a home that Diane Holt inspected and cleared 2 months before she died. Her mother's life insurance policy paid out $160,000. That money moved through Kessler's trust, 20% to Holt, 15% to Strell, 10% to a shell company that traces back to a property Slade Vance leased 18 months ago. Boone looked at the school photograph. A girl with pigtails who had not known what was coming. He pulled his phone. Axel picked up on the first ring. "How is she?" Boone said. "Sleeping," Axel said. "Cot at the back of the fire tower. Sawyer is on the road. Knox has the perimeter. Nobody on the logging road. Nobody yet." Boone closed the phone. "We need Torres," he said to Reaper. "The DA. Today, not this afternoon, now. I called her before we left the diner last night," Reaper said. "She is driving up from Mesa County, here by noon. 5 hours, I know." Carla was watching both of them. She had the expression of a woman who had been working alone for a long time and was recalibrating to the experience of not being alone, testing whether what she was looking at was real. "There is one more thing," she said. "2 editors killed this story before I stopped pitching it. The first received a call from Kessler's firm the same day I submitted the draft. The second took a meeting with Kessler's senior partner 3 days before he called to say the sourcing was insufficient." She looked at the wall. "This is not being suppressed by editorial cowardice. It is being suppressed by phone calls. Kessler has connections to media groups across 4 states. Every time this gets close, someone makes a call and it dies. Then we go above the calls," Boone said. "Torres has federal jurisdiction. Once she files, it reaches a level Kessler cannot touch with a phone." His phone rang. The screen showed a number he had not seen in 3 years. Slade Vance. The room went still. Boone answered and said nothing, just held the phone to his ear and waited. The voice that came through was exactly what he remembered. Warm, unhurried. The voice of a man who understood that the most persuasive frequency is the one that sounds like it is doing you a favor. "Boone, been a while." Silence. The girl's not your problem. She was never supposed to be your problem. This was a clean arrangement that got complicated because a 6-year-old made a bad decision on a bad night. You put her back where she belongs, and this goes away. For you, for Reaper, for the whole club. Boone looked at Carla's wall, at the 7 names with the 7 dates, at Sophie Aldridge's school photograph. I know about the 7 women, he said. A brief pause. The warmth adjusted 1 degree cooler. You have been busy. I know about Kessler and Strell and Holt, and I know what you have been doing for 3 years while we thought you were gone. Another pause. Longer. Last chance, Boone. Bring the girl to the junction at Route 9 and Hollow Creek Road. 1 hour, come alone, hand her over. You ride away clean. The club rides away clean. Boone looked at Reaper. Reaper looked back. In that look was the conversation they had been having since the diner. The conversation about what kind of men they were going to be when the thing in front of them was too large for the answer to be anything less than everything. Slade, Boone said. His voice was level, not because there was nothing in him, but because what was in him did not need volume. I'm going to find you. And when I do, I will show you what we do to men who hurt children. The real code, the one you never had in you. He closed the phone. Carla was looking at him with the expression of someone who has been hoping for something for a long time and is afraid after so long, hoping to trust that it has arrived. We have less than an hour before they move on her position, Boone said. Get Torres on the phone now, not when she arrives now, and call whoever in the press you still trust. One journalist Slade has not reached, someone who will run this before anyone can make a call to stop them. Carla was already reaching for her phone. Boone walked to the door. He drove hard. The roads were better than the night before the storm, having burned itself out in the hours before dawn, but better was relative on a Colorado mountain logging road in January. He made the 12 miles to the fire tower in 17 minutes at a speed that was a sustained conversation between machine and ice, requiring more attention than could be spared for anything else. He killed the engine at the base of the logging road and walked the last 200 yards. Sawyer met him at the tree line. She was awake when I checked an hour ago, Sawyer said. Not distressed, sitting at the top, looking out the window. But Boone, she asked for you specifically. Said she had been waiting to make sure you were the right person. The right person. Boone looked up at the tower. Through the frosted glass of the cab, 60 feet above, he could see the small shape of a girl at the window. He went up the ladder. At the top, he knocked on the hatch. It is Boone. The hatch opened, Wren's face in the rectangle of pale morning light. She had a blanket around her shoulders, and her hair was wild from sleeping, and her eyes, when they found his, held something he had not seen there before. Not fear, not the survival assessment she had been running since the diner. Something that looked like purpose. He came through the hatch and sat on the floor across from her. The glass walls of the cab gave a view of the entire valley, white and silent, under a sky that had finally stopped being a storm. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the diner, running the same assessment, checking whether the thing she had been deciding to trust was still true. Then she said it. My mom told me where she hid it. Boone waited. Wren pulled the blanket tighter and spoke to the floor. Before she got too sick to talk, she told me. She made me memorize it. She said I could not write it down because Raymond looked through my things. She said it to me 3 times in a row until I could say it back perfectly. Her voice was steady, steadier than it had any right to be. The urn on the mantel, the brass one, Raymond never touched it. He said it was morbid to keep it in the house, but he did not make her move it. She said he could not stand to look at it because looking at it made him think about what he had done. And he was not the kind of man who could think about what he had done without the thinking bothering him. She paused. He killed her, and he could not even look at what was left. Boone held very still. She wrote it all down, Wren said, every night after he fell asleep. What he put in the tea, how much, where he got it. The phone call she heard, the man he called, the lawyer, all of it. She wrapped it in a plastic bag and put it inside the urn, under the ashes. She looked up at him. I did not tell you before, because I needed to know if you were going to stay. She said this without apology, the way she said most things as a fact being reported. I have had people leave before. I needed to make sure you were not another one. Boone thought about what it had cost her to hold that information through everything. The Iron Saints arriving, the confrontation with Raymond, the ride to the cabin, all of it, holding the one piece of evidence that could make any of this matter, waiting, assessing, protecting it until she had determined who could be trusted with it. Not passive, not a child waiting to be rescued. A child doing the only thing available to her with everything she had. "You sure now?" he said. She nodded. She reached into the pocket of the oversized flannel she was wearing, Sawyer's flannel, and produced a small object on a thin chain, the chain broken and knotted back together with a careful double knot. A medal, brass worn smooth on one side from handling. "My mom carried it," Ren said. "She gave it to me the last time she could hold my hand. She said it was for going into hard places." She held it out to him. He looked at it for a moment. Then he took it, closed it in his fist. "I will bring it back," he said. "Bring yourself back," she said. He went back down the ladder. He briefed Axel and Sawyer and Knox on positions in the fire tower code, and then he heard the engines. Not Harleys. Cars. Two sets of headlights visible through the trees, moving slow and deliberate. The pace of vehicles that know exactly where they are going and have the authority to take their time. County cruisers. Light bars running. Boone looked at Axel. Axel had already moved to the base of the tower. Knox was at the perimeter. Sawyer had his phone to his ear. Boone called Reaper. "Two county cruisers on the logging road," he said. "How close is Torres?" 30 minutes, Reaper said. "She just called. She is on 191 heading north." And Boone. "Carla's source pulled call logs from the shell company number. Slade called Raymond after you hung up on him. Whatever they said, Raymond moved. He is heading back toward Black Creek." "Toward the house," Boone said. "Toward the house," Reaper confirmed. The notebook was still in the urn, in a house that a murderer was now driving toward. Boone's phone buzzed. A text from Reaper. "Carla just sent Torres the photograph of Slade. Torres is on the phone with the federal magistrate now. She says hold the line." The cruisers came around the last bend and pulled into the turnaround. Two deputies stepped out. The younger one had the uncertain posture of a man following orders he had not personally issued. The older one had the weary steadiness of someone who had been doing this long enough to have stopped questioning the orders and started focusing only on the execution. The older deputy looked at the fire tower, at the Iron Saints, at Boone. "We have a custody order," he said, "signed by Judge Warren Strell. Emergency provision. The minor identified as Ren Cole is to be remanded to Black Creek County, CPS pending review." Boone looked at him. The deputy looked back. Between them, the cold morning air and the specific distance between two men who both understood that what happened next was going to define something that could not be undone. "Sir," the deputy said, "I am going to need you to step aside." Boone did not step aside. He held the deputy's gaze and he waited. His phone was in his hand and Reaper was on the line, and somewhere 30 minutes south, a district attorney was on the phone with a federal magistrate. And somewhere on the road between here and Black Creek, Raymond Pruitt was driving toward a brass urn on a mantle and the evidence inside it. 30 seconds, a minute. The younger deputy shifted his weight. The older one held Boone's gaze with the professional steadiness of a man who was doing the calculation. All men in positions of institutional authority eventually have to do when the institution asks them to act, and the man in front of them looks like this. Boone's phone buzzed. 7 words from Reaper. Torres filed. Federal stay granted. Hold the line. Boone held up the phone so the deputy could see the screen. "Federal override," he said. "She stays." The deputy read it, read it twice, then looked at his partner. The younger man had the expression of someone who had been hoping the situation would resolve itself in a direction that did not require him to decide anything, and was relieved that it had. The older deputy looked at the tower one more time, at the Iron Saints, at Boone, the long, measured look of a man completing a calculation that had started the moment he turned onto the logging road. "Yeah, keep her safe," the deputy said. Quiet, not hostile, not respectful exactly. The recognition of one man by another across the width of everything that separated them. "That is the plan," Boone said. The cruisers backed out of the turnaround one at a time. Their light bars painted the snow and the trees in the tower in alternating red and blue. As they descended, those colors slowly swallowed by the pine, as the road curved away, and then the sound of their engines fading, and then nothing. Just the wind and the creak of the tower frame, and Boone's breathing. which had become the deliberate, measured breathing of a man who is choosing very carefully what he does next, because what he does next is going to matter. He had 30 minutes before Torres arrived. The notebook was in the house. Raymond was on his way to the house. He rode. The roads south were clear in the way Colorado roads are clear after a storm has spent itself, the ice visible and honest rather than hidden under fresh snow. He made the 12 miles to Granger Court in 9 minutes. He parked 2 houses north and walked. The house looked the same as it had in the dark. White siding, dead flowers, the aggressive normalcy of a place designed to communicate that nothing here required attention. Raymond's truck was not in the driveway. Not yet. Boone went through the back, the door still unlocked. He moved through the kitchen without stopping at the padlocked refrigerator, through the hallway, past the black door, into the living room. The mantel was against the far wall, the family photographs, the bookshelf with its unread spines, the throw pillow with its embroidered word, and in the center of the mantel, the urn. Brass, 10 inches tall, a plaque on the front. Lisa Ann Cole, beloved mother. Boone picked it up. It was heavier than ashes alone would account for. He unscrewed the lid. His hands were steady, the steadiness of a man who has made a decision and let the decision settle into his body so the body can execute it without interference from the parts of him that were not steady. Inside, gray ash, fine and even, the particular texture of what remains when everything else has been consumed. He reached in. His fingers moved through the ash, carefully understanding that what he was looking for was the last thing a woman had done for her daughter, and the doing of it had cost Lisa Cole everything she had remaining. His fingers found plastic, a Ziploc bag, sealed, inside something rectangular and small. He lifted it out, wiped the ash from the plastic with the edge of his vest, held it in his palm. He looked at it for one moment. Then he put it in his vest against his chest and screwed the lid back onto the urn and placed it exactly where it had been. He touched the brass surface once, not sentiment, an acknowledgement that did not require words because words would have been insufficient. Then he heard the front door. He stood in the living room with the notebook in his vest and he waited, and the front door opened and Raymond Pruitt walked into his house. Raymond was not alone. Behind him, moving with the unhurried ease of a man who had been in rooms like this, in circumstances like this before, and had always walked out the other end, was Slade Vance, the 3 of them in the living room of a dead woman's house. Nobody spoke for a moment that was longer than its clock measurement. Raymond's face moved through its sequence, surprise, then the calculation behind it, then the mask reassembling with the practiced speed of a man who had been masking for years. Slade's face did not move at all. He looked at Boone with the calm, clear-eyed assessment of someone who had considered this possibility and was now confirming it had materialized. He looked at the mantel, at the urn, at the fine ash residue on Boone's right hand. "You found it," he said. Boone said nothing. Slade stepped into the center of the room. He was relaxed in his body with the practiced management of tension that certain men develop the way athletes are relaxed before the moment of full exertion. He looked at the mantel. He looked at Boone. And he said with the even tone of a man who has been managing situations for a long time, the thing he had come to say. "You know, this does not end the way you want it to. What you have in that vest is one notebook from a dead woman. Kessler has 4 attorneys. Strell controls family court in this county. Holt has signed off on enough cases that the institutional record is going to fight any interpretation that threatens it. You are one man holding one notebook against a system that has been running for 6 years." He paused. "Give it to me. Walk out. Take the girl somewhere quiet, and I give you my word that nobody follows." The word landed in the room with the particular weight of a word spoken by someone who understands it carries no weight and is using it anyway because it is the last instrument available. Boone looked at Slade Vance, the man who had sat at their table for 11 years, who had worn the patch and spoken the words and collected the meaning of brotherhood like currency to spend elsewhere, who had taken a percentage of the life insurance payout on Sophie Aldridge, 7 years old pigtails blue backdrop. He walked to the front door. He opened it. He looked at Raymond and then at Slade. "You are both going to walk out this door," he said. "You are going to drive to the Black Creek Sheriff's Station and sit there and wait. Because in less than 30 minutes, a federal district attorney and an FBI field agent are going to read what is in my vest. And when they do, the only thing that will affect what comes next is whether you were running or sitting still when it happened. Raymond's mouth opened. Boone looked at him. Raymond's mouth closed. Slade looked at the urn. He looked at Boone. Then he turned and walked out the front door, and Raymond followed, and the door closed behind them. And Boone stood alone in the living room of a murdered woman's house with her notebook against his chest, in the silence of the house pressing in from every direction. He called Reaper. "I have the notebook. On my way to you now." And I just let Slade and Raymond walk out. Torres needs them standing and breathing when she files. Make sure someone is watching that they go where they said they were going. Already done, Reaper said. And Boone. Torres just arrived at the motel. She has a federal agent with her. Bring it here. He rode south. Carmen Torres was small, late 40s, dark hair, no jewelry, and a face that had been shaped by years of courtrooms into something that could absorb information at speed without the information altering the expression receiving it. She had driven up from Mesa County with a federal agent named Pruitt from the organized crime unit who had been building a case against Kessler's firm for 14 months and had rerouted the moment Reaper described what they had. She put on latex gloves before she touched the notebook. She read every page, methodically, with the attention of someone who understands that evidence is not a category of reading that permits shortcuts. The handwriting changed across the notebook. Early entries neat and controlled, the letters evenly spaced. As the pages progressed, the letters grew larger and less even, the pen pressure variable, the lines drifting from the horizontal. The body's record of its own deterioration documented in the only system available to it. He put it in the chamomile tonight. 7 drops. I counted. My hands shake when I write this, but I keep writing because Ren needs it to exist. If I stop, there will be nothing left. Nothing they cannot explain away. Nothing that says what happened here and who did it. The last entries were almost illegible, but they were there. Torres closed the notebook. She placed it on the bed with the careful precision of someone handling something that is simultaneously evidence and something else. Something without a legal category, but with a weight that legal categories are insufficient to measure. She sat on the edge of the bed and was still for 30 seconds. Then she walked to the bathroom. She was in there for 2 minutes. When she came back, her eyes were slightly red, but her voice was the voice she had arrived with. "This is enough," she said. "This notebook, combined with Carla's financial records and the physical evidence from the Cole house, gives me probable cause for arrest warrants on Raymond Pruitt, Martin Kessler, Diane Holt, and Slade Vance. Agent Pruitt will file simultaneously at the federal level, which brings the entire operation under organized crime jurisdiction." She looked at Boone. "And Strell," he said. Torres held his gaze. "Strell is harder. A sitting judge requires a judicial conduct investigation with its own timeline. But once Kessler and Holt are in custody facing what this evidence supports, they will negotiate. People in their position always negotiate. And when they do, they will give us Strell. They will give us everything." She paused. "There is one more thing. I need to interview the girl. Formally with a forensic specialist present. Her testimony is the center of this. Physical evidence and financial records establish the mechanism. Ren's testimony establishes the witness, the living person who was inside this while it was happening. That is what makes it real to a jury. That is what makes it impossible to dismiss." "She is at the fire tower," Boone said. "Bring her here. I will have the specialist here by this evening. And Mr. Calloway." She held his gaze for a moment. "What you and your club have done, the evidence you have preserved, the witness you have protected, it is going to be the foundation of every charge I file." She looked at him steadily. "But from this point forward, this is a legal proceeding. Federal jurisdiction, chain of custody, proper process. The methods that brought us here cannot be the methods that finish it. Do you understand that?" Boone understood. He understood that the machinery he had spent his entire adult life navigating around was being asked to do the thing it was supposed to do. He understood that his role, the role of every man who had ridden through a blizzard and stood in a fire tower and refused to step aside on a logging road, was about to become a footnote in a federal case file. "I understand," he said. "But I am not leaving her." Torres looked at him. "I mean, after," he said. "I am not leaving her after any of this is done." Torres held his gaze for a long moment. Whatever she read in his face, she read it fully before she responded. "We will discuss custody arrangements following the arrest," she said. One thing at a time, the arrest came at 5:17 the following morning. Raymond Pruitt was taken at a motel in Durango, 60 miles south of Black Creek. He had driven south instead of going to the sheriff's station. I was in bed when the agents came through the door, and he did not resist. He sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the wall, while his rights were read, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had known this room was waiting for him and had simply been extending the distance to it for as long as the road allowed. Martin Kessler was taken at his Denver office at the same hour. The timing coordinated across 3 jurisdictions to prevent any arrest from generating a warning call to the others. His attorney called a second attorney and then a third. The defense team that eventually assembled had a combined hourly rate that exceeded the annual income of every Iron Saint in the Black Creek chapter. It did not matter. The evidence was too wide and too deep and too thoroughly documented by a woman writing in a green notebook with shaking hands in the dark to be argued away by the cost of the lawyers arguing it. Diane Holt was taken from her home in Black Creek at 5:22. She cried. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said she had always done her best for the children in her caseload. The agent who arrested her, a woman with 2 daughters of her own, had read the files and said nothing. She knew what Diane Holt's best had produced. Slade Vance was the last, a rental property outside Ridgeline. He had been packing when the agents arrived. A single bag, a passport on the nightstand, a laptop open to a travel booking site showing a one-way departure. He looked at the agents when they came through the door, and then he looked at the handcuffs and he smiled, the small, tired smile of a man who has been calculating odds his entire life and has arrived with a kind of professional equanimity at the conclusion that the calculation has finally come out against him. "Tell Reaper I am sorry," he said as they walked him out. The agent did not relay the message. Some apologies are not entitled to delivery. Judge Warren Strell was not arrested that morning. Torres had been accurate. Removing a sitting judge moved through a different channel at a different pace, wrapped in the procedural insulation that judicial institutions use to protect their own coherence. But within 72 hours of the other arrests, 3 federal complaints had been filed against him. Kessler's cooperation agreement, delivered with the thoroughness of a man trying to demonstrate maximum value in exchange for a reduced sentence, was specific and detailed and corroborated at every point by Carla Webb's 8 months of assembled evidence. Agent Pruitt's 14 months of financial investigation into Kessler's firm entered the trial record as 43 exhibits. The organized crime framework that had kept the operation insulated from individual prosecution collapsed once the federal architecture was applied to it. Strell resigned from the bench 4 months after the arrests. His indictment followed 6 weeks after that. The forensic interview happened the evening of the day Torres arrived. A specialist named Dr. Ruth Albright drove up from Denver, a woman who had spent 19 years interviewing children in abuse cases and had the kind of presence that makes a small person feel that the room belongs to them, that their words are the only thing of consequence in it. Wren sat across from her at a small table in a room Torres had cleared for the purpose, and she talked. She talked for 2 hours and 6 minutes. She described the room with the black walls and the lock on the outside. She described the padlocked refrigerator. She described the truck and the mirror and the eyes. She described the tea, the specific cup Raymond used for her mother, and later for her, always brought by his hand, always watched until finished. She described Miss Diane, who came with a clipboard and saw the room with the stuffed animals, and wrote that everything was fine and left. She described the 4 days after that visit. She described the night her mother died. The hospital lights, the sound of the machines, Raymond in the hallway on his phone. He was not crying, Wren said. He looked like he was waiting for something to be done. And then she said something that had not been in any document or financial record or the red string on Carla's wall. "My mom knew he would do it to me next. She told me so. She said, 'Wren, when I am gone, you will be the only one who knows the truth. And the truth is the most dangerous thing you can carry, but it is the only thing that will keep you safe if you carry it to the right person.'" She paused. "I was looking for the right person for a long time," she said. Torres, listening from behind a one-way panel, pressed her hand flat against the glass and held it there. After Albright's report, combined with the notebook and the forensic toxicology confirmation that thallium levels in Lisa Cole's exhumed remains matched precisely the dosages Lisa had documented, in her own handwriting, produced a body of evidence that Kessler's four attorneys would spend the entire trial attempting to find a procedural angle on and failing. The trial of Raymond Pruitt began 4 months later in a federal courthouse in Denver, moved from Black Creek County with the thoroughness applied to cases in which the local institutional structure has been sufficiently contaminated that a neutral venue is not a courtesy but a requirement. The courtroom was full every day. Journalists from 5 states, advocacy organizations that had been fighting this specific intersection of insurance fraud and family court corruption for years and had never had a case this documented and this impossible to dismiss. And in the gallery, in the back 2 rows, taking up more room than the architecture had intended, the Iron Saints. Black Creek chapter. Every man who had ridden through the blizzard, every man who had stood on a logging road and refused to step aside. They came every day. They did not speak. They did not disrupt. They sat in their rows and they watched, and their presence was a fact in the room, the way certain facts are facts, not requiring explanation. Simply present in the way that things are present when they are true. The toxicology evidence came on the 3rd day. A forensic chemist testified that Lisa Cole's exhumed remains showed thallium levels consistent with chronic poisoning administered over approximately 5 months. She cross-referenced the dosage descriptions in Lisa's notebook against the levels found in tissue samples and found them consistent with a precision that the defense's expert witness would fail to account for. The notebook was entered as Exhibit 47A. Torres read sections of it aloud. Lisa Cole's handwriting projected on a screen at the front of the courtroom. Her words in Torres's measured voice delivered into a room full of people who had never met her, encountering her only through what had been done to her and what she had done about it. He put it in the chamomile tonight. 7 drops, I counted. My hands shake when I write this, but I keep writing because Wren needs it to exist. 3 jurors cried. The judge called a recess. Wren testified on the 7th day. Boone walked her to the courthouse door that morning. She was wearing a dress that was new, the first new clothing she had owned in longer than she could clearly remember, purchased by Carla Webb, who had taken on a role in the months since the motel room that did not have an official name but was recognizable to anyone paying attention. Her crutches were new as well. Lightweight aluminum fitted precisely to her height by the physical therapist who had been working with her for 3 months. And below her left knee, visible, below the hem of the dress, she wore a prosthetic leg. Still new enough to be slightly uncomfortable, still new enough that the coordination required negotiation, but there, and she was walking on it, and the walking was hers. She stopped at the courthouse door and looked up at Boone. Will you be in there? Front row, he said. She looked at the building, at the institutional weight of it, the same machinery that had delivered her back to Raymond through Holt's safety reports and Strell's custody orders, the same system that had failed her mother and 7 other women. Then she looked at Boone and straightened her back. She pushed through the door. Her testimony lasted 43 minutes. She sat in the witness chair with her hands folded and her back straight, and she described in the clear, level voice of a child who has made a decision about the truth and intends to keep it exactly what had happened in the house on Granger Court. The room, the tea, Miss Diane, the night her mother died, and then she described Raymond's eyes in the mirror. He saw me, she said. I know he saw me because I watched his eyes in the mirror, and his eyes were on me when he pressed the gas. He did not look away. He pressed the gas while he was looking at me. She said it the way she said everything. Level, direct, without the performance of emotion and without the suppression of it. Simply the statement of what she had seen delivered with the precision of someone who had been waiting for the right room to say it in and had now found it. Raymond broke, not dramatically, not with a shout. He came apart quietly, the mask losing its structural integrity piece by piece. The years of performed normalcy simply failing under the weight of hearing the truth spoken aloud by the person who had been inside it. He stood up. He pointed at Wren. He said she was lying. He said she had always been disturbed. He said she was the kind of child who invented things, who had been given ideas by people with an agenda, who could not be trusted to accurately describe anything she had experienced. The gavel came down once, twice, 3 times. The jury watched. They did not watch Raymond. They watched Wren. Wren, who had not moved, who sat in the witness chair with her hands folded and her back straight and her eyes on Raymond, with the clear, unafraid attention of someone who has already given everything she has to give and is simply waiting for the room to catch up to what it has just witnessed. That was what finished him. Not the notebook, not the toxicology, not the 43 exhibits or the financial records or Carla's 8 months of assembled evidence. The fact that a 7-year-old girl looked at him across a federal courtroom and did not look away. The verdicts came in on the 11th day of deliberation. Raymond Pruitt, guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of Lisa Cole, attempted murder of Ren Cole, aggravated child abuse, 3 counts of insurance fraud, conspiracy. The sentence handed down 6 weeks later was life without the possibility of parole. Kessler received 18 years under the cooperation agreement. He had given them everything, every document, every conversation, every name, with the thoroughness of a man who had decided that the arithmetic of self-preservation required it and had committed to that decision completely. Holt received 12 years. She maintained until the end that she had been doing her best within a broken system. The jury had considered this argument for 4 hours before rejecting it. Slade Vance received 22 years under the organized crime statutes. He did not cooperate. He did not testify. He sat through his trial with the same calm, pleasant expression he had maintained for 11 years inside the Iron Saints and was convicted on the evidence alone, which was more than sufficient. Strell was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. The adoption proceedings began 6 weeks after the verdicts. The family court judge who handled it was Judge Carol Harmon in Mesa County, in a jurisdiction that had not been touched by anything Kessler and Strell had built. She had reviewed Boone's record, the prison term, the years after, the reconstruction. She had also reviewed the record of the preceding months, the fire tower, the logging road, the notebook in the urn. She asked Boone one question: "Mr. Calloway, why do you want to be this child's father?" Boone had prepared for this. He had written answers and crossed them out and written them again and practiced them in the dark of the cabin he had rented in Black Creek while the legal process assembled itself around him. When the moment came, he set all of it aside. "Because she asked me for a chair," he said, "and I was the only one who pulled it out." Judge Harmon looked at him for a long time. She signed the order. 8 months after the night at Mackey's Diner, summer came to Black Creek. It came the way Colorado summer comes slowly. At first, the snow retreating up the mountain faces in patches, the creek running high with the melt, the meadows producing wildflowers in colors that had no business being that vivid in a place that had been that cold that recently. The air smelled like pine and warm earth, and the specific sweetness of a world that has been through something and come out the other side into the light. The cabin Boone had purchased 3 months earlier sat at the end of a gravel road 4 miles outside Black Creek. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a refrigerator that had no lock on it and never would. A porch facing west toward the mountains where the sunset did things to the sky that Boone had spent most of his life not noticing. He noticed them now. Ren's room was the one with the window. She had been asked what color she wanted the walls, and she said yellow without hesitation. Not a careful yellow, the loudest yellow the hardware store in Black Creek sold. The yellow of a room that knows it is allowed to exist. The afternoon of her birthday, the gravel road held more motorcycles than it could reasonably accommodate. They lined both sides from the cabin to the tree line, chrome catching the afternoon sun, engine silent riders scattered across the porch in the yard. Axel had set up a folding table bearing a birthday cake with 7 candles. Reaper Briggs stood at the far edge of the porch with a cup of coffee in his 3-fingered hand watching the yard. Boone had not seen that expression on Reaper's face in 20 years of knowing him. It took him a moment to identify it. Peace, not happiness, not the temporary satisfaction of a resolved problem, but the specific quality of peace that arrives in men who have been carrying something for a long time and have finally found a place to set it down that is permanent. Before the cake was cut, Reaper walked to the table and set something down beside it without ceremony. A small toy car, painted blue, the kind that costs $1 and fits in a pocket. He placed it there and stepped back and said nothing. Ren looked at the toy car, then at Reaper, and was looking at the mountains. She did not ask. Some things between people do not require asking about. She left the toy car where he had placed it and let it mean what it meant. Carla Webb was on the porch steps, Her phone off for the first time, Boone had observed her article, which had run nationally 4 months earlier, already part of the public record in a way that Kessler's contacts could not reach. She was watching Wren with the expression of someone who had found, in the course of doing a job, something larger than the job. Sawyer stood near the tree line doing what Sawyer always did, watching the perimeter. He had not spoken more than 30 words over the course of the afternoon. But when Wren passed him on her way to the cake table, he reached into his vest pocket and produced a small wrapped package. She opened it on the spot. Inside, a compass. Brass, old military issue, an inscription on the back. So you always find your way home. She looked up at him. He looked away. She hugged his leg. He stood very still and allowed it. Wren stood at the cake table with the 7 candles lit and the iron saints arranged around her in the afternoon light. These scarred and damaged men with their records and their histories and their loud machines and the code that the world had spent decades misunderstanding. And she looked at the candles. She closed her eyes. Someone asked what she was wishing for. She opened her eyes and looked at them. I am not making a wish, she said. I already have everything. She blew the candles out. Later, as the sun dropped toward the mountain faces and the sky turned through its sequence of colors, the iron saints drifted toward their machine, not leaving so much as continuing carrying the afternoon with them into whatever came next. Reaper was the last. He sat on his Harley at the end of the driveway and looked back at the cabin for a long moment, at Boone on the porch, at Wren beside him. He did not wave, did not nod, just looked with the completeness of a man who has come somewhere in order to look and is finishing the looking before he goes. Then he turned the throttle and the machine carried him down the gravel road and around the bend, and the sound of it faded into the evening until it was gone. Boone and Wren sat on the porch. The mountains held the last light the way they always do, reluctantly, the peaks burning orange, while the valleys below gave themselves over to shadow. A coyote called from somewhere down the hillside. A second one answered from farther away. The conversation moved back and forth in the gathering dark, 2 voices finding each other across a distance that had seemed uncrossable until the moment of calling. Dad, Wren said, yeah. She was looking at the mountains, her prosthetic leg extended in front of her, resting on the porch rail with the specific casualness of someone making peace with a new part of themselves, learning to inhabit it. The refrigerator, she said. Can we keep it open tonight? Boone looked at her. She was still watching the mountains, but there was something in the set of her shoulders, a slight forward lean, the posture of someone who has asked a question that costs something to ask. He understood that this was not about the refrigerator. It was about every locked door, every room with no window, every night she had spent in a space that announced through the mechanism of a padlock that her existence was something to be contained rather than a life to be lived. It was about whether what surrounded her now was real or another performance, whether the yellow walls and the open kitchen and the man beside her on the porch were things that would hold or things that would reveal, as every other good thing in her experience had eventually revealed, the lock on the outside. We can keep it open every night, Boone said. She leaned against his arm. He put his hand on her head and held it there. The mountains kept the last light as long as they could, and then the light was gone, and the stars came out over Black Creek, Colorado. The kind of sky that only exists far enough from everything else that the dark is actual, dark, and the stars are actual stars, and the distance between them is the real distance, and not something the atmosphere has compressed into manageability. Boone sat on the porch with his hand on his daughter's head and looked at that sky. And somewhere in the distance, down the gravel road and out onto the highway, and across the dark expanse of the state, the Iron Saints rode through the Colorado night, their engines announcing their passage through the dark the way certain things announce themselves. Not asking permission, not requiring it, simply present and moving and alive in a world that had against considerable odds found room for them in it.